So you would like to learn about the economy in EU5, a game that covers a time period encompassing the development of banking, globalization, trade, and the Industrial Revolution. Well, you have come to just the right place. Hello everyone, I am Benjamin Magnus, and today myself and little Lorris are going to break down the core mechanics behind the economy and the trade systems in EU5. We have also provided timestamps in the description below if you are looking for specific bits of information. That should serve as a good index for you. Today we're going to start off by loading into the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and heading over to our economy panel. This should default to your balance tab. All your economic efforts, from the smallest peasant farm to the largest transcontinental trade routes, aggregate into just a few line items on the balance sheet. We're going to start here with the tax base, which can be found in the upper left-hand corner. Opening up the tooltip will show us a list of our top locations and a historical graph tracking tax base over time. One thing you may notice is that our top performing locations are all urban, and the numbers quickly fall off to much lower tax bases in rural locations. We can even hover over the individual tax base for each location and find out where the taxes are being drawn from. And in this case, the vast majority of the tax base is being distributed between the nobility and the commoners. If we look at the nobility here, we can see that while they make up 52% share of the tax base in this city, they are not currently being taxed, which means none of the money is making it to the state treasury. Our total taxes actually being pulled from the location is listed here, and we can see the majority of that is coming from the commoners. What's important to pull from this is that the tax base, whether it be aggregate for your entire nation or the individual amounts for each location, is the total value of all production from that area. Once the value has been appropriately divided between the estates, that estate is then taxed on that amount based on the sliders in your balanced panel. This generates the actual ducats being pulled into your national coffers. For many nations, trade will also be a major source of revenue. Keep that in mind. Another way to generate money is to simply print more of it. Right here you can see we have a minting slider. It is currently providing us an additional 8.35 ducats per month, and remarkably is decreasing inflation. You may wonder why that is. All nations have a base inflation number of negative 0.1%. That means it will always trend to go down if you are not minting that much money. If we take the slider and drag it up, inflation will start to tick up over time. Another thing to remember is that printing more money doesn't come out of nowhere. Here we can see that increasing the amount of money that is being minted has also increased the amount of gold and silver needed in our market. So you will need to attempt to produce that gold and silver or trade for it to bring it into your market. And of course, inflation is bad because it will increase prices over time. But you can hit a median point where you can have no inflation but still be printing more money. Some other economic levers you have to manipulate here are loans and debts. Clicking this button over here will allow you to take out loans. Hovering over the button shows you how much money you can take out at a max, and a good thing to remember is that this money is being taken as a loan from the estates, so it is them that you are paying back all that interest to. On the other side, we have our debt button, which is where we can go to see how many loans we have and to pay them off. Over here on the right, we have our expenses column. Something to keep in mind is that some costs scale based on the size of your economy, and some costs are fixed based on what you are actually doing. Court cost, diplomatic spending, and stability are examples of things that will become more expensive as your economy grows. Now, your army maintenance, navy maintenance, and fort maintenance will only scale based on what you actually build. If you have no navy, you will not be paying navy maintenance. If you have a large navy, you will be paying more in navy maintenance. So one of the reasons we dove into the Mamluks here is that they have a number of different estates, more than some other nations. Every different estate has a different tax slider, so you can adjust their taxes individually. So let's say your nobility is having a runaway power loop. They are taking all of their money and using it to construct buildings that is then further increasing their power base. A way you can handle that would be to potentially increase their taxes. This will reduce the amount of money they have available to increase their power base. And as you can see, as we moved the slider, our income grew because we were gaining more in tax revenue. But their satisfaction began to drop. It's always a trade-off. You may also notice that the bar did not get very far. Every estate will also have a maximum tax rate. Hovering over the slider will show us the minimum and the maximum tax rate. Right now, for a nobility estate, it is 21-ish%. This maximum rate is dictated by a number of things. Privileges could be granted to estates that could, say, decrease the maximum tax burden and increase their satisfaction or give the country a different bonus. But a major contributing factor of where this number is coming from is how powerful the estate is. Here you can see that the large power base that the nobility currently has is decreasing the amount of taxes I'm allowed to extract from them. So a powerful estate will accept a smaller tax burden from you. If you'd like to see how powerful all your estates are, you just need to hover over the pie chart right here in the top bar. It will give you a breakdown of each estate's power. Hovering over the number will give you more information, like where all of that power is coming from and the modifiers that it is motivating. How much you end up taxing each individual estate is going to end up being very situational. Low taxes means satisfaction will be increasing. High taxes means it will be gaining more ducats for the national treasury. You could usually find a balance point somewhere in the middle where satisfaction will remain stagnant and you still will be making a little bit of money. But sometimes you may want to make an estate happy to avoid a rebellion, or sometimes you might desperately need the tax revenue being generated by that estate. Sometimes you might want to increase the power of an estate by allowing them to have more of their share of the tax base by not taxing them. And sometimes you might want to try to curtail the power of an estate by taxing the bejesus out of them so they have less extra money to spend on building new buildings to increase their power base. Those are a few things to keep in mind when choosing these levels. You can also simply automate them, which will generally attempt to maintain a status quo. So, if we're trying to think of the economy as a whole here, we can think of it on 3 different levels. At the base level, goods are being produced in a location. This could be raw resources from RGOs or finished goods created by your burghers and laborers. Next, those goods are being traded within a market. The market is determining the actual value of the goods based on supply and demand. At this level, value can be added by taking low-value goods you've created and selling them at a different market where the price is higher. And finally, there are modifiers that are applied at a national level. An example of that is back on the balance sheet here with tax efficiency. You could think of tax efficiency as sort of a force multiplier for the tax base that is created from all of your locations. In this case, we actually have a negative tax efficiency. This is being generated because of our extremely low crown power and a law we have in effect. So why don't we start talking about some actual economic theory here? One of the biggest economic levers you have to manipulate in EU5 are buildings. You'll be constructing buildings in your locations. Those buildings will employ POPs. Those POPs will produce goods, whether it be raw resources or finished products, which will then be used in the market or traded abroad. All this in an attempt to increase the economic output of your nation so that you have a greater tax base to pull revenue from. Now, there are a lot of factors that will come into play as you try to tactically place buildings in the most beneficial location. Things like POP availability, control, and market access will influence these decisions. As an example, you may have a lot of POPs available in an area that has a valuable RGO, but if you have very low control, you're not going to be able to extract a lot of value from that location. Now, as we discussed, nearly all value in EU5 is based around the production of goods and the trading of goods between markets. There are many different types of goods in the game. Some are consumed by your POPs, some are used to equip your armies, and others are used to build and support infrastructure. And furthermore, some goods are used as inputs for POPs to turn them into higher value output goods. It is going to be the delicate balance between supply and demand for these goods in their markets that establish the price that is paid for them. That in turn determines how much of a value they actually hold. In other words, a high-end good that has a very high base price but a very low demand is not worth very much to you. For example, if you are creating a fairly high volume of a good with a decent base value, like books here, but there is no demand for books in your market, the actual realized price will be low. When demand in a market increases, you can try to meet that demand by increasing production or importing goods. The first thing to look at here is that all goods will have a base price. If you hover over any of these goods, you can see in the upper left-hand corner the base price. Now, the base price and the actual price will only be the same if supply and demand are exactly equal. Something you might also notice is that the price listed on the panel and the price listed in the tooltip as target price are different. This is because the prices will not meet their equilibrium point immediately. The price will change over time. The bigger the difference between the supply and demand, the faster the price will change. Here we can see the price of pearls changes every month by 0.68 ducats. So it will keep rising from where we are to where we're going at that rate. The other thing to keep in mind is all these prices are market dependent. Up here at the top, we can see market information for the market we're looking at, and we could cycle through all of the markets that we have presence in. Therefore, because the prices are market dependent, moving goods between market can fluctuate the price in both markets that the goods are leaving from and arriving in. In an ideal situation, you would like to produce goods in an area where they are cheap to produce and move them to an area where they are in demand and thus have a higher value. That is not only good for your pops and for your markets, but you also get a direct proportion in ducats of the value created by the trade. Because it's important to keep in mind, we're going to reiterate this point. All these actions are creating wealth in your nation that contribute to your economic base, which all flows to your estates based on their power. And that it is from these estates that value, in terms of ducats, is being extracted via taxation, and that is the money you have to use when you're playing the game. Let's dive a little deeper and start talking about production as an economic layer of the game. At its base, you have your RGOs, Resource Gathering Operations. We are on the raw materials map mode right now, which will display every location's RGO for you. And every location will have one single RGO. This could be marble, sand, wheat, rice, legumes, or more exotic things like gold, silver, or elephants. Because of this, your starting position on the map can be very impactful on how you decide to play the game. So countries with access to more exotic resources will probably have an economy built differently than a country with vast open fields of farmland. Your RGO level of production is also very valuable because it requires no inputs other than the labor used to work the buildings, and has no upkeep. Which means as long as you have peasants to work the buildings, they will be producing value. Another important thing is that some RGOs, like lumber and stone, are input resources for construction tasks. And if a country cannot procure enough resources to continue construction, that construction will halt. A good way to jumpstart a basic economy would be to construct RGOs for construction materials and then use those materials to build new buildings to increase your economic value. Heading over the building tab here, we can see that a lot of the buildings listed are color-coded. Now, it might not be obvious what these color codes mean. That's where this bar of buttons comes in handy. All of these different colors represent the different types of pop that will be needed to operate the building. So here we could see that we have noble buildings, cleric buildings, burgher buildings, laborer buildings, soldier buildings in red, peasant buildings, tribesmen, and slave buildings. This can be useful if you're, say, wanting to increase the number of soldiers available in your manpower pool. You would be wanting to build buildings that employ new soldiers. Now, fundamentally, all buildings do is take an input and create an output. That input could just be labor, or it could be labor and a number of other goods. The search bar is also very handy here. If you know what you want to create but don't know the name of the building that goes with it, you can simply type in anything here and try to find the right information. So if we know we want to brew more beer but don't know the name of the building that makes it, we can just type in beer, sort by beer-related buildings, and we get the market village and the brewery. While we're on the brewery, why don't we take a look at the tooltip for this building? You'll see a similar tooltip for all buildings. This section right here represents your different production methods. Production methods are different ways that you can produce an output with different inputs. So on the left here, you can see that we're using different inputs to get a similar output. These can all be manually selected, or you can let the AI choose which one is most efficient for you. We can also see its upgrade path as we progress through the game, and the different production methods available for the upgraded buildings. Not all outputs from a building will necessarily be a physical good. It might be something less tangible that is beneficial. For instance, if we take a look at the granary here, you can see that we're just inputting a small amount of labor, and our output is increased food capacity in our urban centers. The castle is a fantastic example because it provides a number of benefits. You can also see it increases the power of the nobles, which might be why you see them building some castles of their own with their hard-earned ducats. The castle will provide a physical fort on the map, and provide zone of control in the area around it, protecting that region during times of war. And it will reduce unrest in that location as well, while providing soldier jobs. And the input it requires to produce those modifiers is a little bit of stone, a little bit of tools, some weapons, and some tar. And as a final example, here we have irrigation. Again, we are inputting labor and a very small amount of tools, and our output is an increase in population capacity in that location and a food production percentage modifier. And you can build multiple of these, and those percentages will stack. So you're inputting small amount of tools and labor, and you're outputting a food production modifier. And because it's a percentage modifier, not a flat modifier, if you are building it in a location that already has a large food production, that will pay dividends in total food production. Something to keep in mind is that not all buildings can be built in all locations. Some of them are locked to a specific type of location, like on a river or in a city. You can see that if we click on Granary, it will highlight the locations that we can build them in, and the number represents how many levels of them already exist. You can see that our fishing villages are only available in rural coastal locations. Or the lumber mill here. You can see we could build it in a lot of locations, but some areas are not highlighted. If you want to know why, you can simply hover over the location and then check the requirements not met tab, and you can see that we need to have woods, forest, farmlands, or jungle available. That also means that if a location changes, some of the buildings within it might be destroyed. If you have a lot of rural buildings in a location and then decide to upgrade it to a town, the rural buildings will be destroyed. This is why it might behoove you to attempt to plan out your economic future, at least in the short term. It would be a shame if you spent your hard-earned ducats building up a rural location just later to decide that you would like to urbanize it and waste all those buildings built before. Now, if you become rich and powerful, the ducat input cost for all those buildings might be meaningless to you. But if you are a poor, struggling nation, it might be best to try to maximize efficiency. Now, I just mentioned efficiency. That is a literal mechanic in the game that can be very beneficial. Let's take a look at it. If we click on a location and then on a building, we'll be able to see information about the specific buildings in that specific location. In this case, we're looking at a spinner's guild, 2 levels of it. You can see that we can change the production methods that we talked about before to use different inputs to create different outputs. And when I say a different output, I really mean most of the time it's going to be a different amount of the same output for a different input. So you can see we're using cotton to output 1.67 cloth. Or we could use wool to output 1 cloth, or fiber to output 0.8 cloth. But anyway, production efficiency. It's listed here. You can see that right now it has several small modifiers. Literacy of laborers, so increasing literacy of the pops working in a location will increase efficiency. And levels of building. This is what is sometimes called efficiency of scale. Having 10 spitters guilds available in the same location will make all 10 of them more efficient than 10 spread out in 10 different locations, one at a time. This can mean that specialization of industries can be very efficient. You could stack up more levels of a building in the same location and get increasing levels of production efficiency out of those buildings. Now, this economic theory might sound perfect on paper, but in an ever-changing dynamic world with many variables at play, this could be a weakness, especially to an enemy. Say, for example, you build all your weaponsmiths in a single location to maximize efficiency. Congratulations, you are now efficiently making more weapons than you otherwise would have. That also means that that location is a critical weak point in your military. An enemy occupying that province has completely cut off your army from its supply of weapons. Perhaps the enemy cannot reach your location because it's heavily guarded, but maybe the resources needed as inputs in those weaponsmiths are not as heavily guarded. Maybe interdicting trade routes is a good way of starving your weapon industry out. These are all strategic decisions you'll have to make. Maybe it's a good idea for you in the situation you're in to hyper-specialize in one location. Maybe it's a good idea to have a specialized location in every market that you have presence in. Or maybe it's a good idea to spread out your industry across the map. That would make it very easy to take out small portions of your production, but very hard to take out a meaningful percentage. And to tie things together here in a neat little bow, this is why urban locations can be very important to your nation. Hovering over this icon right here will show you the maximum amount of supported building levels in that location. You can see right here we can support nearly 150 buildings in this city, and that number will go up with our development. Higher development, more buildings. We currently have 32 here, so lots of room for growth. And you can see our Spinners Guild can support 37 levels of building. That will be a lot of production efficiency. And if you want to see where that number is coming from, you can hover over the 37 here. If we head to an undeveloped rural location, you can see that right now, the maximum amount of buildings we can have here is 30. Something important to note is that your levels of RGO used do not count towards your building cap. We have 0 buildings built here, but 7 legume farms. Now that may seem like a ton of buildings and we'll never hit that cap. But it is the 1330s, we have 500 years of game to play, that's lots of opportunity for growth. You most likely will get to the point in some of your locations where you max out the amount of buildings that can be supported there. In that situation, you would be required to start spreading out your industry if you wanted to continue to grow it. Or you can try to increase the number of buildings you can support by increasing development and population. But increasing those numbers is more of a long-term goal. This tangentially, at least, brings us to the next thing we wanted to discuss, which is that building all those buildings requires resources in the form of ducats and actual construction goods. That's going to be wood, tools, masonry. This at least tangentially brings us back around to the next point I wanted to discuss, and that is all of these buildings we are going to construct has a cost, not only in ducats out of your treasury, but in goods out of your market. For example, our stone quarry here cost us ducats. Now every building has a base cost and a modified cost depending on the actual cost of goods in that location. Our salt collector here will take ducats and lumber. Let's take a look at our masons here. We have 22 levels of them available in our nation. They will constantly be creating masonry that is traded on the market. This is a little off the path for what we're talking about here, but is still economic theory that you need to understand. Goods are produced in your locations. Those goods are sent to the market. And then goods are purchased from the market when they're needed based on who has the most trade advantage in that market. So here we're looking at our main market and it is sorted by trade advantage. We're at the top. That means we get to buy first. Once all of our needs are met, then the next person goes and the next down the list, which is why a high trade advantage is very good. It allows you first dibs at goods on the market. If you're playing a smaller or weaker nation in a powerful market with large neighbors, there's a good chance you will not be at the top of your list. So you may find yourself in situations where you're creating goods, but then you do not have access to them. If you're wondering why that is, chances are someone paid a higher price for them before you got access. So in this instance, if we're talking about masonry, if you were creating a lot of masonry, but all of a sudden your buildings stop construction, chances are someone higher up on the list has purchased all of the masonry in the market before you got a chance to meet your needs. Now, you could always construct more masons to increase supply, and then hopefully you will be able to fully meet the needs of the person higher in the food chain than you, and it will spill over and you'll get access. But they might see it as an opportunity to just construct more buildings and use all that cheap masonry that you are now providing. Embargoes are also a thing, but we'll talk about that later. Back to our masons here. I just mentioned that the actual cost of a construction in terms of ducats is modified by the price of goods. That means we've hit a bit of a dilemma. High cost of goods is great for the building because it is more profitable, therefore there is more value to be extracted. But the high cost of those construction materials is going to increase the price of those buildings you're trying to build. So if you want to get those construction costs down, you could simply build a lot of masons. But then we've got a lot of masons, which are now not very profitable. And that's where this button comes in. Subsidies. Now, if we click it right here, this will subsidize all masons in the nation. You can do it individually by location. We saw that before when we were looking at the Spinners Guild. Sometimes you may want to do it by location, but a lot of times you'll want to do the entire industry at once. This will mean that even if the buildings are operating at a loss, you will make up the deficit to bring them to equilibrium. Sometimes it could be a great idea to completely collapse the price of goods and then subsidize the buildings just enough to keep them in business. The lower cost of the goods is more beneficial than the money spent on subsidies. Another example could be military goods. You may find yourself in a situation where continuously building a lot of cannons is not a profitable endeavor, but you want to keep them available in case you go to war. You can subsidize the industry. Your other option here is to close the buildings. The little padlock will shutter the building without destroying it. There's a number of situations where this is a viable strategy too. Say you have a non-profitable industry that you don't want to bother with but don't want to destroy the buildings. You can shutter it. Or say a global catastrophe sweeps over the globe and kills 50% of the population of a general area. It may be a good idea to shutter some of those construction material buildings and send the laborers to go work some farms. Now, we've showed a couple different ways to actually build your buildings, but there's a couple we haven't touched yet. So you can simply right-click on any building and it will build a level of that building in the location where it is most efficient. You can also select a building and click on the map where you would like it to be. Or you could use these pluses over here. The same goes for RGOs. Simply clicking on an RGO on the map will construct a new level of it where you clicked. Now, actually deciding where you would like to put a lot of your industry can be decided in a number of ways. One of the things you could do is simply sort by maximum profit per level. This will give you a button you can click on that'll just build the RGO in the most profitable location. The other button in the adjacent column will bring you to a filtered build list that shows you every building that's applicable to the item you clicked on. In this case, weaponsmiths can be built in an urban location, and the market village has a production method which will allow you to make weapons, and those can be built in rural locations. And again, remember, we're looking at a single market here, and if you're playing a small nation, you will probably be contained into a single market. But if you're playing a large nation, there's a good chance you'll have multiple markets to choose from. Let's rewind just a tad and go back to our Carpenter's Guild here. We haven't paid much attention to this section of the tooltip yet, but now that we've mentioned it, let's talk more in depth. You can see we have the most efficient locations to build a building listed. You may also notice that the top of the list is populated by the location with the highest aggregate control and market access. So we've talked about control before, and there are various ways you can try to increase control. But one of the important things to remember is that control is partially based off proximity. Proximity is how easy it is to get from a location to a location. In this case, we're talking about from your capital to anywhere. If we take a look at a province adjacent to our capital, you can see that we have very high proximity still. We have a base cost from going through land, and that it is heavily modified because it is downstream along a river, which means natural geography, like rivers, will heavily impact proximity. Now, proximity will go both directions along a river, but it is directional. That means that if we look south along the Nile here and take a look at one of our provinces, you can see that we have a small proximity bonus for going upstream along a river. If we look downstream along the Nile, you can see that we have a large bonus for going downstream along a river. And the farther away from our source proximity we get, the more these numbers will add up and our proximity will go lower. Lower proximity, lower control. So geography is very critical here. You can see if we clear our map modes that basically as soon as we hit the desert, we lose proximity. Thus, we lose control. You may also notice that proximity is propagating along the coastline a little further. That's because of a modifier called maritime presence. If we have a strong naval presence in a sea zone, we will propagate proximity along that sea zone. And because the sea zones are generally larger than the land zones, we'll be able to propagate proximity further along the coast. So a strong navy can help you increase control. Your other option is some infrastructure. We have some buildings and roads. If you click on Build Road in a location, we can build roads from where we start to any place that we want to go. You may even notice we have 4 levels of roads that you will unlock as the game progresses, from gravel roads to railroads, which we know that our Prussian Space Marine players will enjoy. There's also a couple buttons that will modify how the game calculates what is the best road. By default, it will be whichever one propagates proximity the best. But we could also modify it by travel time, by construction cost, or simply by time. Time is money. The roads will reduce proximity through locations, thus allowing you to propagate it further out from your capital. Now, the building I mentioned is the bailiff early game. The bailiff will give you a local proximity source with a value of 20. Now, proximity is not additive, it will take the best one available. So if you build it in a location that has 40 proximity to your capital, it will have no effect, it will pull the 40 proximity from your capital. so it'll be mostly used to get proximity up from 0 to 20 in your hinterlands. But at the end of the day, 20% extracted from a province is way better than 0. Now, the other side of the coin that goes hand in hand with control is market access. Now, market access is similar to control, but instead of radiating out from your nation's capital, it is being pulled in toward the market center. The market center can be thought of as the capital of the market. Now, our nation capital is here, and our market capital is there. And if we zoom out a bit, we can see that every market has their own market capital. Just like control, a lack of market access can decrease the value that you can extract from buildings. For RGOs, it will simply reduce the location's tax base, just like control. But when we're talking about buildings, it's a little bit different. At the individual location level, market access can be found right here. You can see that the transportation distance to the market is reducing our market access. Another point of interest is that whatever market capital is easiest to access is the market that location belongs to. That means that a location can move between marketplaces, which is affected by how easy it is to access the market capital. In relation to buildings, market access is going to be modifying how much input is being used to create how much output. So at 50% market access, you'll use half as many input goods and get half as many output goods. You can also see that infrastructure and rivers are playing a massive factor here. A good thing to keep in mind if you're trying to manipulate the markets. You may also notice this Create Market button. That can be good. It could also be very dangerous. This will create a brand new market at a location that you choose, and it will recalculate which locations belong to which markets based on that new market center. I do caution you though, be very careful with this button. It can sound like a good idea a lot of the times, but the ramifications of those actions rippling throughout your economy can be devastating. Circling back to the tooltip we started this conversation at, the Carpenter's Guild. Now we understand why the high control and the high market access are going hand in hand to make our capital here a profitable location to build a building. The lower control in other locations is reducing our tax base in those locations, thus reducing the value that we can extract from them. And the lower market access that we can see here is going to be lowering the RGO tax base that is being created and is going to be lowering the goods consumed, thus reducing demand, and goods built, thus reducing value. So the most valuable places to build at the moment are going to be the places with high control and high market access. I know that was a lot of information to throw at you very quickly, but at the end of the day, both these numbers being high is good. And we've covered a couple things that you can do to help increase those numbers. So we're around 14 pages into this script, and there's a couple points that I want to try to drive home here. And that is, there's a lot of things that go together hand in hand that should drive your decision making. For this situation that we're in Egypt, we want to try to build a power base that is profitable. And if we want to figure out how and where we can do that, there's a lot of information that we've gone over that will help us make those decisions. We already know that the confluence of control and market access will lead to profitable locations. Our capital is upstream on a major river. Huge bonus for us. We have the Nile Delta downstream. Huge bonus. We have our market center on the coast downstream from the capital. Really good. Let's use our map modes to make some more decisions. Topography is going to show us that we have flatlands, which is not giving us any bonus, but the wetlands would give us some negative modifiers. We also have vegetation, lots of access to farmlands. And if we take a look at our climate, it's mostly arid, but we have a few Mediterranean spots as well, which will boost our population capacity. If we look at our raw materials, we may not have a lot of high-value RGOs in the Nile Delta, but we have a lot of low-value RGOs that we could produce efficiently to start a working economy. Now you may say, Ben, I see something. We have some gold. Gold is valuable. We do. We absolutely do have some gold. And I think this is a great time to go take a look at that gold-producing province and see where our problems lie and some actions that we can take to try to fix them. So if we zoom on into our gold-producing province here, you can see that it is a very sparsely populated area with only a few thousand tribesmen living in it. Our market access is 49%, not great, not terrible, but our control is currently 0. And if we take a look, the maximum control is also 0. If we go into our nested tooltips here, we can see that our max control will not go above 0 under current conditions. We have a law reducing control by 5%. We have an estate privilege reducing it by another 5%. It is an integrated province that is giving us a bonus, so if it is cored in the future, that will go higher as well, but the average satisfaction is really dragging it down. Now, your first thought would be, hey Ben, we've talked about some of this stuff before, let's build a bailiff. We could absolutely try that, but we'll run into other problems. Now, the bailiff needs 200 soldier pops to operate, but if we ever do get it operating, it will increase proximity and thus control by 20. The problem is going to be those 200 soldier pops. There are no soldier pops living in this location, and the low level of control we already have is going to hamper promotion speed, to the point where it's almost non-existent. So we could absolutely go ahead and construct that building, but it will remain empty for a very long time. If we take a look, our promotion speed is bottomed out, absolutely cratered, due to lack of control. You can see that we found ourselves in a negative feedback loop. Lack of control is destroying promotion speed. Those lack of promotions is preventing us from getting a working bailiff, which will increase control and thus increase promotion speed. So while it's a great idea, in this case, it would be for naught. So we need to find other ways to attempt to increase control in this location. One option we have available to us is to take a look at the culture. We can see that it's 99% Hijazi. Left-clicking on them will bring us to the appropriate page. Scrolling down, we could find them right here at 1.88% of our population. We do have available accepted culture cap, so we can move them from a discriminated culture to a tolerated culture for little cost. This will help boost average satisfaction over time. It won't really move the needle right now, but it will help in the long run, and it didn't cost us anything that we couldn't afford to lose at the moment. We can also see the average satisfaction of the tribesmen is very low for some other reasons, namely due to lack of goods in the market and the fact that the tribe's estate is very unhappy. So we could try to import more goods into the market to get rid of this modifier, or we can try to increase the satisfaction of the tribesmen, or both. You can see that satisfaction-wise, we're in a dilly of a pickle. Satisfaction is low and trending down. One of the biggest issues is Egypt is in a succession crisis, so short-term strategy, fix that. We also have negative stability. Negative stability is a big draw, so we'll want to try to raise our stability as well. You may also notice that our tribes have no privileges. We can try to grant them privileges, but that will make the other estates less happy. Let's start with a little respect. You can see that increased satisfaction of the tribes, but it had a negative impact on the other estates, mostly the nobles. So we're starting to move the needle just a little bit here and just a little bit there. One of the other issues we saw was this privilege granted to the nobles. It lowers max control everywhere by 5%, a huge modifier. Your first thought might be to just revoke the privilege, but the cost is 193 stability. Now you may be thinking to yourself, Ben, maximum stability is 100. How can that be? And you're right, maximum stability is 100. But it goes into the negative to minus 100 as well. So you would have to nearly max out your stability and then push that button and crater it down to almost minimum to revoke that privilege from the nobility. They do not like having their privileges taken away. And you've already seen negative stability means less estate satisfaction. So dropping it down even lower than it is right now would have a negative feedback loop. So this would be a very long-term goal, attempting to curtail the power of our very powerful nobility estate. This is not necessarily a viable option for us right now. The other thing to note on our list was laws. It was an admin law, namely this one right here. Local courts, max control minus 5%. We could attempt to change these laws, but that would again be a stability hit, but this time only 107. That is an easier swing for us than nearly 200 stability. So this might be a more short to midterm goal. So on our gold province here, we've sort of got ourselves dug into a corner. With zero control, we cannot extract any wealth from this province. And with our country in a bad spot and our options currently limited on what we can do to move the needle, we might not be able to fully utilize this province just yet. There's absolutely mid and long-term goals that we can try to achieve here to make this a very profitable gold mine. But it's just not something that we can do in our current situation. We have to fix some problems before we can come back and address this gold mine. Conclude the succession crisis and raise our stability are what we want to focus on at the moment. Which brings us back to our lovely Nile Delta. We can work here. We just have to work at a different scale with different opportunities in mind. We're not going to be producing a lot of very high value goods right now, but we absolutely have the opportunity to produce a colossal amount of low value goods and then either trade them to increase value or utilize them in buildings we construct in urban locations to produce a higher value good out of them. And that absolutely 100% concludes everything you need to know about the economy in this game. But you probably looked at the runtime of this video. Of course, we're not done. Up until now, we've mostly been discussing producing goods in locations and then using them in locations to produce some sweet, sweet wealth in the form of ducats. But like the Sith, there is always another way to produce money. In EU5, the other way to produce wealth is through trade. We've talked about this in brief. Trade income is created by moving a good from one market to another, ideally from an area where it has a low value to an area where it has a high value. The reason we've skimmed trade as it stands right now is trade is an entire beast unto itself that is related to production. Production needs to happen first before there can be trade. As we've touched on before, all goods will have a base price and an actual price being paid for them. That actual price being paid is being informed by the actual dynamics between the supply of the good and the demand of the good in that market. That part's easy. High supply, low price, high demand, high price. The actual price of the good will be its base price only when supply and demand are perfectly balanced. It's important to remember that you cannot immediately change the price of good by flooding a market. Goods have a price equilibrium that they will try to hit, and the actual price will change over time to get to that equilibrium. If you alter the supply or the demand, what you are doing is changing the equilibrium point that the price is trying to reach. It will still change monthly to reach that point. This may sound like there's only positives in having one large concentrated market. The downside is that market access will go down as you get further away from the market capital. So depending on some variables like what your neighbors are up to and geography, it may be beneficial to create new markets in strategic locations, instead of having everything concentrated into one large market, but that decision is ultimately up to you. There's also the market's language. The market language is going to be determined by the most populous burgher's common tongue. In our case, it's Arabic. This could be another important source of attraction, as speaking the same language will increase market attraction. So if we look over here, a Greek-speaking location would be less likely to join an Arabic-speaking market. There's also some diplomatic actions that we can engage in as well. Here we can see that diplomatically we can offer preferential access. This will make the locations in the nation that accepts more likely to join a market. On the other side, we can embargo nations. If we take a look at the countries tab on our market, you can see that we have a list of nations doing business in this market, and if we want to, we can embargo them. One more modifier that I want to point out is market attraction. Market attraction is being affected by a number of mechanics. Prestige, trade income versus tax base, which means that higher trade income versus the taxes being collected here will make it a more attractive market. Higher development helps, and trade-focused buildings that are staffed in the location will make it a more attractive market. It can be very beneficial to try to stack market attraction to make your market more powerful if you are a trade-centric nation. Now that we've had a bit of a market refresher, let's talk about some more specific situations, like what happens if demand outstrips supply. This brings us back to the market access of a location. Locations with high market access will get to buy goods first. So every location will meet its demand and then move on to the next location down the list. Once the supply runs out, every location from that point downwards will lose access to that good. So high market access means you get to buy first. And then in turn, that high market access will also mean you'll be able to utilize that good more efficiently. All markets also have stockpiles for every good. If demand remains high, you will start to pull from the stockpile. Once the stockpile runs dry, then those locations go without. And on the other side of the coin, once the supply has increased, the stockpile will refill. There are some buildings you can construct that will increase your stockpile, and higher development will also make that number grow. Another option you have is to relocate the market center. You could simply move it to another location if you find one that is more beneficial to you. And some eagle-eye viewers might even notice that you can destroy markets. Again, a drastic decision that sometimes can be beneficial. This will briefly give us an opportunity to show off another thing I love, more map modes. If we take a look at harbor capacity, we can see that good harbors gives us good bonuses. So if you are in an expansionist mindset, a good harbor can be a good target for a new market capital. But anywho, now that we've discovered what a market is and how we can interact with it at a top level, let's do some trading. I know we're going to get into some actual trades at some point. We'll do it, I swear. But we have a few numbers here that are important to us. Trade efficiency operates just like production efficiency, as just a force multiplier for our profits on trade. You can see that we're getting some from an advancement, some from our religion, and some from a law. Trade advantage dictates which nations get their exports fulfilled first in a market, and it is being informed by our estate satisfaction from the burghers. Trade maintenance is a representation of trading not being free. There is a cost to doing business. Think of that as the cost of horses, oxen, wagons, ships, labor, and even sound tolls, and the wear and tear on all of these things based on distance. We currently have a negative modifier, making it a little bit cheaper, and that is coming from an age advancement. Trade capacity is a modifier of how much actual trading we can engage in. Higher trade capacity, the more trading we can do. We currently have a negative modifier here. If we hover over, we can see that we have a lot of positives, but we also have one big negative of minus 25% from a policy. Now, this is a burgher policy, and you might think that burgher policy should help increase trade. And it does, in a way. It is reducing our national ability to engage in trade, but it is vastly increasing the estate's ability to engage in trade by themselves. We have market attraction, which we just talked about. Market protection is simply the opposite of market attraction. One will negate the other. And trade range is simply how far your merchants can reach. The movement of goods between markets is stimulated by the creation of import orders or export orders. And this will simply move the goods from one market to the other, adjusting the supply and the demand in both markets, thus changing the price. Simple. Here we can see that we have a huge surplus of fiber crops, which is driving down the price of the good. We have a middling demand for it in our market, and if we would like to increase the profitability of those industries, we could simply export some of it. The next screen will default to the most profitable trade routes. You could entirely automate your markets, or you could automate a portion or all of your markets. This is where our trade capacity comes in. The more trade capacity we have, the more goods we can move. You could see that Tunis has a fairly good price for our fiber crops, and no supply of their own. Now, it could be a good idea to use all of our capacity, but why don't we go with, say, around half? That will move 2 units of fiber crops to Tunis for a profit. Now if we head back to the market panel and then to the trade tab, we could see that we have an active trade to Tunis of fiber crops. This will be creating value for us through direct profits from trade, but will also help increase the value of the goods being produced in our market. This is sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing. Sometimes you want to keep prices low, sometimes you want to jack them as high as possible. For instance, exporting food to increase the costs so that your RGOs are more productive could be a good thing. But it will also increase the strain on your estates who need to spend more money to meet their needs. So now that we have a profitable trade, let's see how much money we're actually making from it. We can do that by taking a look at our economy panel and down here at trade income, where all of our trades are broken down. Right at the top, you can see that we are selling our fiber crops in Tunis, and we are making 0.29 ducats from that. Now, the actual profits are 3.14, but then that is being modified because of our crown power. Our crown power right now is very low, so our share of the trade is also very low. We can see our crown power by going to our estates panel. It's right here. Again, that succession crisis is really negatively affecting us. Now, if you're struggling with your economy a bit, if you don't know what to buy, what to sell, and who needs what, there is a place to go to get some help. If we take a look at our economy panel and then head over to the trading tab, here we can find some information we are familiar with, like trade capacity and the automation button. And we have some drop-down panels that will show you good trades based on categories. So we have our current trade, that's the one we manually set up. Our government does not need any goods, so this one is empty. Here we have a laundry list of items that our buildings need, a bigger list of items that our pops need, suggested food imports, exports for profits, and imports for profits. Some of these may overlap a little bit, so if you alter one, you may see changes elsewhere. Well, why don't we test this out with a pop need? Try to make some people happy. Now, the most efficient place that we could import jewelry from would be from the Sevilla market, but it is not available to us because they are not producing enough. But Pest is. It is a less profitable trade, but we can actually engage in it because the goods exist. This is super useful because it can give you a good understanding of where potential profits may lie. Let's talk a little bit more about market capacity though. Now, market capacity is based on each market, so it will change market to market. And surprise, surprise, you can increase trade capacity by constructing new buildings. So if we take a look at our marketplace over here, you can see that it will increase the trade capacity of its owner. It will also increase the trade capacity of your burgers, so it will be increasing their power base. So now you know the absolute basics about how to trade. We are creating goods and utilizing our trade capacity to move those goods. Now it's simple on paper, but what to move, where, and when is the important factor. And this will change depending on your situation in the game and how the game develops over time. For instance, as the Mamluks here, we have a unique position in that we have access to the Red Sea and access to the Mediterranean. We can endeavor to create a lot of wealth through trade by accessing things like spices in India, importing them into our market, and then exporting them again further into Europe. Another attribute you might want to factor in is the buildings that the estates decide to construct on their own. They're usually looking to increase profitability and increase their power base. That means they'll be more likely to invest in a new building that is part of an already profitable industry. If we go up to the top panel and hover over any of the estate info bars, you can see in the middle what they're aiming to build. Toll Castle, Farming Village, Weaponsmith, Tar Kiln, Sheep Farms, and a clay pit, and the location that it will be in. So what you can do is attempt to manipulate market prices to goose the estates into the direction you'd like them to go. A good example of this for us is going to be lumber. We do not have access to lumber in large quantities in areas where we both have high control and high market access. That lumber is going to be in high demand. We'll need it for construction, input goods for buildings like the Carpenters Guild, and in the charcoal kiln will be used to make coal. Coal is another input good that is useful for a lot of industries. The estates will not be too terribly interested in investing in these industries because the high input good cost will make them not very profitable. Now you can attempt to make your lumber RGOs that much more efficient to meet demand, or potentially you could import lumber at a loss to depress the cost of the good to help other industries. The unequal distribution of resources across the planet is one of the things that makes this possible. Not all countries will have equal access to all goods. Because every time you play the game in every different nation, the events will unfold differently, there will be an ever-changing set of variables that will dictate what is the best course of action for you in that moment. One more final thing to keep in mind when talking about trade is institutions. Institutions spawn physically in a location on the map, and then will spread out from that location. The rate that the institution will spread to other areas is partially related to trade. So say we down here in Egypt need an institution that has spawned up in Italy, it might behoove us to start trading as much as possible into the market that owns that institution. That will help bring the ideas back home to us and spread the institution in our land. This will become increasingly important as the game progresses, because staying up to date with institutions as the ages progress is very important. A nation with access to the next level of advancements will have a significant advantage over one that does not have access. At this point in our guide, we've covered all of the basics that you'll need to master the flow of wealth into and out of your nation. But your nation as an entity will also have an effect on some economic variables. First, there's minting, which we covered at the beginning of the video. Increasing the minting slider will increase the money we print, which increases inflation and also increases the amount of gold and silver needed in our market. Another point is to tie this back into the gold-producing province we saw before. So if you're playing a country that has a lot of gold mines and you're utilizing them heavily, you will want to keep an eye on inflation because runaway inflation can really ruin an economy. Next, we have our loans, which we also looked at earlier. We can take out loans, but remember, we will be paying back these loans with interest to the estates. And if we right-click our debt button, we can see a breakdown of the loans taken, and this is where we can go to declare sweet, sweet bankruptcy. You do not want to declare bankruptcy. Debt is bad. If we take a look at our crown power, we can see that we have a current negative modifier for being in debt. That number will grow as the debt rises. We've already talked about crown power a lot. Low crown power, super bad. And that ties back into tax efficiency. Tax efficiency and trade efficiency are extremely powerful modifiers, and having such a massive malice to these from our low crown power is doubly bad. Our crown power being under the threshold of 25% and the succession crisis we're currently in are the two biggest issues our country is facing right now. And the point of pointing this out is that all of these numbers and mechanics tie together and inform each other to equal the numbers we have on this page in front of us. Pulling a lever over here will have a number of effects over there. This huge malice that we have to tax efficiency is so devastating that I want to take another minute to talk about it. Tax efficiency increases the amount of money you get from taxing the estates without actually increasing the money taken from them. It's basically printing money out of thin air. And it being in the negative, even though we're taxing the estates, we're taking a hit to how much money is entering our coffers. And you may have been able to pick it up, but a huge problem that we have right now in this scenario is that we just don't have enough money to do all of the things we want to do. And we're throwing a lot of it away. One of the things our country desperately needs is more stability so that we can increase satisfaction and maybe try to revoke a privilege or change some laws. But we're already maxed out and it's costing us a hefty 13 ducats a month. Now, as we said before, these numbers scale based on tax base. So as your tax base goes up, so will the cost of these sliders. But if you increase tax efficiency without increasing tax base, you will get more money to work with without impacting the actual costs of utilizing these sliders. Imagine how much better we would be financially right now if we not only eliminated the minus 15% malice that we have, but pushed it into the other direction and had a 15% bonus to tax efficiency. And all the while, our expenses have remained the same. Our trade efficiency operates along the same lines. It increases the value that we gain from a trade. You might scoff at a few percentage points, but the thing to remember is that this percentage is being applied to the value of the trade good that is being traded, not the margin being created when you trade it. To make this a little simpler, think of it like you're selling 100 ducats worth of good. The 6% modifier is being applied to the 100 ducats worth of goods, so you'll end up with 106 ducats. Now say the cost of the trade was 99 ducats. Before trade efficiency, you were making 1 ducat. After trade efficiency, you're making 7 ducats. Now that was an extreme example, I was just using a big round number to make it simple. But you can easily find yourself in situations where high trade efficiency is the driver of your economy. It can help you import goods at a loss without it being as devastating, or to undercut rivals to help foster the destruction of their economies. We talked about production efficiency as it applies to a location, but it also applies nationally. And again, it is motivated by burger estate satisfaction. And because production efficiency is going to be increasing the outputs created by a building, it is simply increasing our value for free. The vast economy of EU5 is a set of systems that interplay and form the foundation of a lot of gameplay. And like the evolution of technology and history that the game simulates, you'll have to evolve your economy with the times. It's much more of a question than should I have a rural or an urban economy. It's more of a broad spectrum of how rural or how urban should my economy be, and when should I be making that transition? What resources do I have available to me? Am I running a traditional or a capital economy? As the game progresses, you'll normally start to try to urbanize more and more. The guilds will upgrade into workshops with slightly bigger margins, making for more efficient production. You may also find yourself in a situation where you've capped out all your best RGOs and you need to look for more profitable opportunities elsewhere. Speaking of opportunity, colonization and globalization will still push us further towards the bounds of what is viable. Overproduction of urban goods may end up collapsing their prices, but global trade will decrease trade costs and increase trade range, giving us more opportunities to sell goods at a wider market, in turn helping us keep those prices at a profitable level. But as the world opens up to us, it opens up to our competition as well. Utilizing those efficiency numbers and cheap input goods will help you dominate a market and force others out. New lands and new colonies can provide profitable ventures to feed the beast of industry at home. They may also introduce your population to new goods. But that specifically is for another guide. We hope this tutorial helps you understand the basic economic systems in EU5, but hopefully this will help you get your hands on the levers a little bit faster. Do stick around for the next guide, because in EU5, there is only war.